There are different holy days of obligation throughout the year, and this Feast of the Assumption that we celebrate today, for me personally, has always been one of the most confusing and most difficult to understand, particularly when I was younger. But as I get older, I think it becomes a little bit more clear to me what exactly the Church is teaching with this feast that we celebrate today. So just a few words about that and a kind of a history of this feast. It's always been kind of believed within the church since the time of the resurrection, from what it says in the Acts of the Apostles, that Mary has a very special place of honor within salvation history. She is the one who brought Jesus into the world. And the Acts of the Apostles tells us that Mary also, or when Jesus was assumed into heaven, body and soul, the people just assumed that his mother, that same dignity would happen to her. Much like when we die, our physical bodies decay in the ground, our spirit goes to be with God in heaven, our soul. But for Mary, that's very different, because she was the one who brought the Lord into the world through the birth of Jesus. And so because of that, she is assumed, the Assumption, what we celebrate today, into heaven. This is, as I said, long believed in the church, but really only officially proclaimed only a little over a half century ago, in 1950, in fact, with Pope Pius XII officially declaring this to be dogma of the church. And part of his motivation for doing that, if you understand history and what was happening in the world at that time, it was just shortly after one of the most destructive periods of human history, with the Second World War and the Holocaust, and many millions of people who were slaughtered, and many innocents who were slaughtered as well. Death was, and really poverty and disease and destruction were all around different parts of the world, particularly in Western Europe. And so this was, in a sense, the church's recognition of this, and in a sense kind of giving a sense of hope to the world that we can overcome, that we can rebuild, that we can survive even this horror and this tragedy which we have inflicted upon ourselves, that God does not give up on us. So that's parts of the history of this particular feast that we celebrate today. As I said, as I get older, I think this becomes more important to me. I don't think it's any surprise, but in some ways, I'm kind of in the business of death. You know, I have funerals and I bury people quite often, between 40 and 50 people a year that I have funerals for different people within the pastorate, and also other family and friends of mine in different parts of the archdiocese. And so death is something that I deal with on a fairly regular, on a pretty regular basis. And as I get older, I think I appreciate the experience of death, and working with families, understand kind of the grief and the issues that they go through when a loved one dies, particularly when somebody who dies tragically, that it becomes more real to me as well. That my own mortality, my own death is going to happen someday. It's not something I sit around and dwell on day in and day out, but it is something that is still very, very real. And this feast is a reminder to me that what death brings to us is not the end. That God had a plan for Mary and assumed her body and soul into heaven, that he has a plan for us as well. And that the place that we seek to go to, the place that Jesus prepares for us, as he says in John's Gospel, is something that we strive for. You know, it's not like we are saying, it's like, oh, I can't wait for that to happen right now, you know, but it is a reality. It's going to happen to all of us at some point in time. The Feast of the Assumption is very much a reminder that death is not something to be feared, that Mary was not afraid. My soul is the handmaid of the Lord. Let it be done to me according to your word. And that's really God's promise to us. So I think that, for me, is what this feast is about. And by signifying it as a holy day and having us come to share the Eucharist is a reminder that this is the eternal banquet that ultimately that we strive for. And that as Mary was assumed into heaven, that that's a place that we seek to go.